Hi, fourth grade, it's Mrs. Schaefer. For math today, you're going to need your textbook and your notebook, a pencil, and a highlighter because we have a vocab word that we need to define. So let's begin on page 398. The title of our lesson today is to add unlike fractions. So meaning that our denominators are not going to be the same. So we are going to write in our notes, chapter 20, lesson 5, add unlike fractions. Beginning as always with our quick review. Let's start with number 1. Let's do this fast. If you need to pause the video between each problem, go ahead. 7/8 minus 2/8 would be 5/8. Number 2, 2/6 plus 3/6 would be 5/6. Number 3, 3/5 plus 1/5 is 4/5. Number 4, 10/12 minus 3/12 is 7/12. Number 5, 9/18 minus 2/18 is 7/18. Nice job. Let's take a look at our textbook on page 398, beginning with explore. Oops, forgot. We have our vocab we need to find or to define. So let's write this vocab word in our notes first and then highlight and give its definition, which is right in our explore. Let's write unlike fractions. And highlight. And please give its definition, which is unlike fractions are fractions with different denominators, just as I had mentioned in the title of our lesson. So unlike fractions, fractions with different denominators. So remember, denominators is that number on the bottom, down, denominator. Now let's take a look at the Explorer in our textbook. It says, read with me, unlike fractions are fractions with different denominators. You can use fraction bars to add unlike fractions. Unfortunately, without being in the classroom, we are not going to be using fraction bars. So I will show you how to solve fractions that do not have the same denominators. So let's take a look at the problem. We have 1/2 plus 1/4. Let's write this problem in our book, and we will continue to solve this without fraction bars and paper pencil only. So the problem reads half. I'm going to leave some space. Leave some space in your notes too, and you'll see why. Half plus 1/4. To solve this problem without fraction bars, you need to have an equivalent fraction. You need to have this denominator be similar to this denominator? The way to do that is by giving that equivalent fraction. So what could we do to either one of these fractions to have the denominator be the same? I would need to change this fraction to have a denominator the same as 4 in order to add. So 2 times what number would equal 4? If you said 2, you are correct. Now remember that whatever you do with the denominator, you will do with the numerator. So I will multiply this by 2 as well. Here's why we are leaving room. Now we are going to solve to have an equivalent fraction of half. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. I'm going to pretend as if this is not here, and now I have a problem of 2/4 plus 1/4. Can I add now? Yes, because my denominators are the same. So now I can solve. 2 plus 1 is 3. I have like denominators, so I can keep it the same. So my answer of my original problem of half plus 1/4 or a quarter equals 3/4. Let's look at the try it in your textbook. The try it says use fraction bars to find the sum, but remember we're not using fraction bars. We are going to use paper pencil. So we are going to try problems A, B, C, and D in our notes. Keep your textbook handy so that you can refer to the problems, as I will do the same by writing the problems in my notes and then solve paper pencil strategy. Let's do that. So here I am at the try it. And I'm going to start with problem A. It says 1/4 plus 3/8. So I'm looking at my fractions and I'm going to decide which fraction would give me a denominator of the same by making it an equivalent fraction of that fraction. So when I look at these fractions, I can change this fraction to have the same denominator as this fraction of 3/8. So what is an equivalent fraction of 1/4 that will give me a denominator of 8? So I am going to think, what number do I need to multiply by? 4 times what number will also give me 8? That would be 2. What I do to the denominator, I will also need to do to the numerator. So this will need to be multiplied by 2 as well. 4 times 2 is 8. And 1 times 2 is 2. I'm going to pretend as if this is not here anymore. And now I can add, because my denominators are now the same. So I have 2 plus 3 in my numerator, which is 5. And my denominator is 8. So my original problem of 1/4 plus 3/8 would equal 5/8. Now let's move on to B. The problem is 1/3 plus 1/6. So looking at my fractions, which will give me a better denominator? I'm looking, I have 1/3 and 1/6. I can change this fraction to have a denominator of 6. So to have an equivalent fraction of 1/3 with a denominator of 6, what do I need to multiply it by? So 3 times what number will give me 6? That would be 2. and 1 times 2. So what I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2. Now that I have like denominators, I can add my numerators right across. 2 plus 1 is 3. And my denominator are the same, so I keep my denominator of 6. I have a fraction of 3/6, meaning that I can simplify. So I'm going to divide each by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So my original problem, when looking back at my textbook, of 1/3 plus 1/6, my answer is half. Let's try letter C. The problem reads 1/6 plus 5/12. So again, I'm looking at my fractions and deciding which would give me a denominator in order to solve. I can make this an equivalent fraction to have a denominator of 12, leaving this fraction alone. So what can I multiply this denominator by to give a denominator of 12? That would be 2. What I do to the denominator, I do to the numerator. So let's find an equivalent fraction for 1/6. 6 times 2 is 12, and 1 times 2 is 2. Now that my denominators are the same, let's add the numerators. 2 plus 5 is 7. I have like denominators, so I would just keep them the same across. So my original problem when looking at my textbook of 1/6 plus 5/12 would equal 7/12. Now let's do problem D. The problem reads 3/4 plus 1/6. Here's a challenge. I know that whatever I multiply this denominator by will not give me the same denominator of 6. And I know that whatever I multiply this denominator by will not give me the same as 4. So I need to think of the least common multiple, meaning what number can I multiply each by to give the same denominator? When I'm thinking of my math facts or my multiples, I am going to give them the same by multiplying this fraction by 6. And then let's solve, and you see what we need to make this a denominator of. So let's find an equivalent fraction of 3/4 by multiplying each by 6. So 4 times 6 is 24. And 3 times 6 is 18. So now that I have an equivalent fraction of 3/4 is 18/24, what can I multiply this denominator by to have the same as 24? 6 times 4 would give me 24. So what I multiply the denominator by here, I need to do the same up here. So now I have this fraction, okay? So 6 times 4 is 24, and 1 times 4 is 4. Now looking at these fractions, I am now able to solve. So with my denominators being the same, what is 18 plus 4? 22. And our denominators stay the same. So it would be 24. Now, I know that I can simplify this problem, but I've run out of room, so I'm going to rewrite it down here, only because, like I said, I ran out of room. So now what can I multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number to find its answer, or to find its simplified form? That would be 2. 22 divided by 2 is 11. 24 divided by 2 is 12. So my original problem of 3/4 plus 1/6 equals 11/12. And here's the work to show how we got that answer. Nice job. Let's take a look at the connect in our textbook. In our textbook, it says you can use equivalent fractions to add fractions with unlike denominators. Well, they kind of tricked us in try it with letter D by doing that already. But let's do the problem that they have in the book for us. We have 2/3 plus 1/2. Let's write that in our notes. So here in my notes is my connect. And I have 2/3 plus 1/2. Okay, so letter D was a little tricky, but with lower numbers, maybe we can solve this one. But it's still the same strategies. So you want to have the same denominator in order to solve. So we have to think, what can we multiply this number, okay, 3, and this number 2 by to have the same denominator? What would that denominator need to be? The denominator would need to be 6. So let's think. What can I multiply 3 by to get 6? That would be 2. Remember, what I do with the denominator, I do with the numerator. 3 times 2 is 6, and 2 times 2 is 4. So an equivalent fraction of 2/3 is 4/6. Having that equivalent fraction, remember equivalent meaning the same. This fraction is the same as this, but we need to have a denominator the same in order to solve. Oops, now you can't see my addition sign. All right, so now this needs to change to a denominator of 6. So what do we multiply it by? 3. What I do to the denominator, I have to do the same to the numerator. So 2 times 3, as we know, is 6, and 1 times 3 is 3. So now we can solve 4/6 plus 3/6 equals 7/6. But with a numerator that's bigger than my denominator, I can't do. I have to rename. That would make it an improper fraction. So you can do this in your head, or if you need to show how to do it on paper, start by writing 7 divided by 6. How many 6's go into 7 without going over? That would be 1. 1 times 6 is 6. 7 minus 6 is 1. So now here is my whole number of 1. And then here is my numerator of 1. And my denominator does not change. So 7/6 is renamed as 1 and 1/6. Now let's take a look at our book again with the practice and problem solving. With the practice in problem solving, we are going to skip problems 1, 2, and 3. We are going to focus on problems 4, 5, 6, and 7. Let's start with 6 and 7 because that was more like how our lesson started. And then we will end with 4 and 5 because 4 and 5 were like the try it D and this connect that we just finished. So let's write practice in our notes and start with number 6. Write the problem in your notes, please. So here I have in my notes the problem number 6 from our practice in problem solving on page 399. I have 1/12 plus 3/4. So I need to look at my fractions and find out which fraction do I need to make an equivalent fraction to have the same denominator in order to solve. When looking at 3/4, I can make this an equivalent fraction where the denominator has 12. So I am going to multiply, and I'm thinking 4 times what number will equal 12? And that would be 3. What I do to the denominator, I need to do to the numerator. 4 times 3 is 12. And 3 times 3 is 9. So now they moved it over to this side. I have 1/12 plus 9/12 would equal 10/12. When I look at this fraction, I know I need to simplify. So I am going to divide each by the same number, and that would be 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. So my original problem of 1/12 plus 3/4 equals 5/6. And here's the work to show how we got that answer. Let's take a look at number 7. Number 7 says 1/5 plus 3/10. So here we are thinking which which fraction would give us a denominator of the same. I'm going to leave 3/10 alone because I can change this denominator here to be the same as this. So what is an equivalent fraction of 1/5, that has a denominator of 10? I would need to multiply each part by 2. 5 times 2 is 10. 1 times 2 is 2. So now I'm going to pretend as if this isn't here, and then I can solve because now my denominators are the same. Starting with my numerator, 2 plus 3 is 5. And we have like denominators, so it stays the same as 10. Looking at this fraction, I know I need to simplify. I can divide each by 5 to put this fraction in simplest form. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So my original problem of 1/5 plus 3/10 equals half. Now let's go back to number 4 and 5. That is like the challenge of where the denominators we need to multiply to have the same denominator for each fraction. So for number 4, I have 2/5 plus 1/2. Okay, so I need to have equivalent fractions for both of these to have the same denominator, but it has to be the smallest denominator that's easiest to solve. I have a denominator of 10. So I will multiply this by 2 and this by 2 to have a denominator of 10. So if 5 times 2 is 10, what's 2 times 2? That would be 4. Now to have this have a denominator of 10, I need to multiply it by 5. And my numerator is multiplied by 5. So an equivalent fraction, let's continue. 2 times 5 is 10. And 1 times 5 is 5. Okay, so 4/10 is an equivalent fraction of 2/5, and 5/10 is an equivalent fraction to half. The reason we are finding equivalent fractions is because we need to have the denominators be the same. Now, since I have like denominators, I can now add my numerators across. 4 plus 5 is 9, and I have like denominators, so it stays the same, 9/10. Looking at this fraction, I don't need to do anything with it. My numerator is smaller than my denominator, so there's no renaming, and I cannot make this into simplest form. So this is my answer of the original problem of 2/5 plus half equals 9/10. Let's end with number 5. I have 2/3 plus 1/4. What can I multiply to have the same denominator? My denominator would have to be what? 12 would be a reasonable answer. So let's find an equivalent fraction of 2/3 that has a denominator of 12. So 3 times what number would equal 12? That would be 4. What I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So 3 times 4 is 12. 2 times 4 is 8. This also has to have a denominator of 12. So the equivalent fraction of 2/3 is 8/12. So let's find an equivalent fraction of 1/4 to have a denominator of 12. So 4 times 3 would equal 12. What I do to the denominator, I do to the numerator. And 1 times 3 is 3. Now I can add. What is 8 plus 3? That would be 12. And then my denominator is the same. So it would also be 12. Or 1. Oops, sorry, 1. Sorry, I just checked my math. This isn't correct. 8 plus 3 is not 12. 8 plus 3 is 11. I'm so sorry if I confused you. So 8 plus 3 is 11, and then our denominator is 12, so it would be 11/12. That is the end of lesson 5 of Add Unlike Fractions. Remember, in order to add, you have to have denominators that are the same. So you may have to change one or both of the fractions to have equivalent fractions in order to solve. Meaning, where you changed one fraction, like this one, 1/4, to have an equivalent fraction of 2/8, and then solve. Or just like letter D here, we had to change both fractions to have equivalent fractions. Okay, so 3/4 equivalent fraction is 18/24. An equivalent fraction of 1/6 is 4/24. So having the same denominator in order to solve, so you had to change both fractions for that one. Let me know if you need more help. you may begin lesson 5 of your homework.